King Charles has quietly removed Queen Camilla's children from the royal succession. There was no public statement. Not even Camilla was told in advance. The surprise move has shocked palace staff and raised questions about what's happening behind closed doors. It's a major break from tradition, and could be just the beginning. According to senior insiders, King Charles recently signed a private royal decree behind closed doors. No press release, no cameras, just a small gathering in the Queen's Gallery, where a few senior royals were present for what they assumed was a routine discussion. But instead, they witnessed something far more serious. A decisive moment that may have permanently severed Queen Camilla's family from the monarchy's official future. Those present described the atmosphere as unusually tense. No one quite knew why they had been called in. Then the king entered, calm, reserved, holding a sealed folder. He didn't speak much, just opened the document, placed it on the table, and signed it. Insiders say the decree was drafted in total secrecy. It reportedly removes any ceremonial recognition or future association of Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, from royal representation. While they were never officially part of the succession line, their quiet presence at events blurred the lines. This move erases that ambiguity completely. And it was done without a whisper of public explanation, no briefing, no warning, not even to Camilla herself. A royal aide said the silence was what made it so unsettling. Not just the act, but the deliberate lack of context. Standing near Charles were Princess Anne and Prince William. Their presence didn't go unnoticed. Both watched in silence as the king signed. They didn't speak, they didn't react, and according to some observers, that silence was louder than any statement they could have made. Was their attendance planned? Or did they just happen to be in the room? Some believe it was a show of unity, a way to demonstrate that this decision had institutional backing. Others suspect they were there to keep the process calm, or simply as witnesses to an irreversible choice. But what truly shocked the palace was Camilla's absence. Reports say she wasn't even aware the decree existed, and that she may have been en route to the meeting room when it was already being signed. Whether that was a miscommunication or a deliberate exclusion, no one knows for sure. But the impact was immediate and undeniable. What began as a quiet signature may now trigger one of the most personal and public shifts in royal dynamics the crown has seen in years. The question everyone's asking now is simple: why? Why would King Charles, after years of standing beside Camilla, make such a cold and calculated decision? And why now? The answer, insiders believe, may lie in something far older than any current royal drama. During a recent reorganization of Queen Elizabeth's private archive, a sealed envelope was discovered. On it, two initials, D and C, Diana and Charles. It was personal, handwritten, and dated during one of the most fragile moments in the royal family's history. Sources say the letter was written by Princess Diana during the early 1990s, in the aftermath of her separation from Charles, but before her death. The contents were never meant for the public. This wasn't a political statement or a speech. It was a private expression of fear and a mother's plea to protect her children's future. In it, Diana reportedly warned Charles of what she saw as the greatest threat to the monarchy: confusion. Confusion over roles, over bloodlines, and over the sanctity of the royal succession. She wrote, according to those who've seen the letter, that the line between personal affection and national duty must never blur, especially when it came to the next generation. One line in particular stood out. Diana is said to have written, "If William ever has a daughter, protect her place. She will carry more than a title. She will carry the public's heart." At the time, Princess Charlotte hadn't even been born. But to Charles, reading those words now, with Charlotte stepping gracefully into the public eye, the message hit like a lightning bolt. It wasn't just advice, it felt like a prophecy. Multiple sources claim Charles was visibly shaken after reading the letter. One aide said he sat with it for nearly an hour in silence, refusing to be interrupted. To him, this wasn't just a painful memory. It was a call to action, a reminder of everything he failed to protect when Diana was alive, and everything he might still have time to protect now. And so, the decision began to take shape. This wasn't about rejecting Camilla. It wasn't about punishing her children. It was about restoring clarity. Diana's words, though decades old, had reopened something in Charles that had long been buried. Guilt, perhaps, regret, or simply the realization that the crown, if not carefully guarded, could lose its center. And in that moment, it became clear. To secure the future, Charles had to make peace with the past. For years, Queen Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, have existed in a quiet space between public curiosity and royal protocol. They don't hold titles. They aren't in the official line of succession. Yet somehow, they've always been there, seated in key rows at coronations, attending high-profile state events, smiling in the background of historic royal photographs. To the casual observer, it all seemed harmless. But inside the palace walls, not everyone was comfortable. Some insiders say Camilla was intentionally building a space for her children, not through declarations, but through visibility. The more they were seen near the royal family, the more normalized their presence became. In royal terms, that's not just proximity, that's positioning. Public perception slowly shifted. Tom, a food writer and television personality, and Laura, an art curator, began showing up in the same headlines as working royals. It was never official, but it didn't need to be. Their growing familiarity was enough to spark concern. Behind the scenes, that concern reportedly centered on one issue: tradition. The British monarchy runs on bloodline, duty, and a carefully maintained order. And while modernizing the royal image has long been a priority, there's still a line that can't be crossed, and Camilla's quiet campaign was edging closer to it. Prince William and Princess Catherine were said to be particularly protective, not out of jealousy or rivalry, but out of duty. Their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, represent the future of the monarchy. Any confusion about roles, titles, or hierarchy could weaken that future. One royal aide described the situation like this: "It's not about disliking Tom or Laura. It's about the message. If you allow unofficial members to share the royal spotlight, you dilute the institution's meaning." And that's where the tension began to grow. Camilla has always played the long game. She knew public opinion was once stacked against her, and she worked carefully, over years, to rebuild her image. But she may have believed that same patience and persistence could extend to her children. Quiet appearances, strategic moments, no declarations, just presence. But for some within the palace, presence wasn't passive. It was political. What Charles once tolerated as a personal concession may have become a liability, especially with Diana's letter fresh in his mind. The quiet integration of non-royal blood into royal imagery may have felt like a step too far. And so, with growing pressure behind the scenes and rising questions from within his own family, the king made his decision. It happened fast, quietly, almost clinically. Those inside the Queen's gallery that day say there was no build-up, no back and forth, no royal preamble. King Charles walked in unannounced, a document in hand, flanked not by his wife, but by Princess Anne and Prince William. That alone sent a message. Camilla was nowhere in sight, and as the three of them entered, the air in the room reportedly changed, like a pressure drop before a storm. There were about a dozen people present: senior aides, 2 legal advisors, and select household staff. Nobody had been told why they were there. But once Charles pulled open the folder and reached for a pen, it became clear. This wasn't a briefing. This was a moment. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer context. He didn't even sit down. He simply signed. One bystander said you could hear the scratching of the pen echo across the room. Another claimed their hands trembled as they realized what was happening. No one interrupted. No one dared. And yet, it was obvious that this was no ordinary signature, because what King Charles signed that day was a formal decree, quietly updating the royal succession documents. And with one stroke of the pen, Camilla's descendants, her children and grandchildren, were officially removed from all future standing within the royal line. To some, it was a matter of protocol. To others, it was deeply personal. Either way, the result was seismic. The silence that followed was deafening. Not a murmur, not a whisper, just stillness. One longtime aide reportedly stepped back as if bracing for an aftershock. Another dropped a tray, the only sound to break the silence. A formality? A power move? No one could tell at the moment. All they knew was that something irreversible had just taken place. When Charles handed the freshly signed decree to Princess Anne, he spoke just 2 words: "It's done." He didn't elaborate. He didn't wait. He simply turned and exited the room, leaving those behind to process the enormity of what they had witnessed. And then came the realization: Camilla had not been present. In fact, according to multiple insiders, she hadn't even been informed. One senior staffer later confirmed that she had been en route to the gallery, believing she was attending a routine planning session. She was just moments too late, walking the corridor as the ink was drying. By the time she reached the doorway, the scene had changed entirely. The gallery was almost empty, the energy gone, the document already sealed and removed from view. And Charles? He had vanished, retreating to his private quarters with no intention of returning. Witnesses say the Queen Consort stood frozen in the threshold, confused at first, then visibly distressed. For a woman who has spent a lifetime perfecting royal composure, who's endured public scrutiny, scandal, and a decades-long campaign for legitimacy, the mask cracked. Just for a moment, one aide described her face as ashen. Another called her expression devastated, like the breath had been knocked out of her. She didn't speak, she didn't cry, she didn't demand answers. She simply turned and left, wordless, stunned. But in her silence, everyone in the palace understood. Something had shifted, not just in policy, but in power. Something unspoken had been severed. For those closest to Charles, the message was clear. This wasn't an impulsive move. It was deliberate, calculated, a decision likely made long ago, now carried out with surgical precision. There was no statement issued, no press release, not even a note left for Camilla. Inside the palace, the ripple effect had only just begun. But outside, the first whispers were already growing louder. Something had broken, and the world was about to find out. What happened next wasn't public, but it didn't stay private for long. Camilla didn't speak to anyone immediately after the decree. She disappeared into her quarters, flanked by 2 senior aides, her expression unreadable. But behind the scenes, palace staff say her reaction was anything but calm. One described the Queen Consort as visibly furious, not emotional, not tearful, but cold, controlled rage. Not the kind of meltdown tabloids fantasize about. No sobbing, no shouting, but something quieter, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. Within hours, she requested a private audience with King Charles. It was granted without hesitation, but no aides were allowed inside. What followed behind those doors remains one of the most tightly held royal secrets to date. And still, details have begun to leak. According to multiple palace sources, Camilla did not plead. She did not ask why. She confronted. "You were never loyal," she reportedly told him. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Staff outside the room said the silence that followed was deafening, a kind of heavy, weighted pause you only hear when something personal has just shattered. Because for Camilla, this wasn't just about the decree itself, it was about the silence, the fact that Charles had acted unilaterally, without even giving her the courtesy of a warning. She didn't care about protocol or optics, or whether it made strategic sense. She cared that he hadn't told her, that he hadn't trusted her, that after all these years, he had still made her feel like an outsider. What reportedly followed was a direct, unfiltered account of everything she had endured: the public scrutiny, the years of venom from the press, the slow, painstaking effort to rebuild her reputation after being branded the other woman. She reminded him of how carefully she'd walked the line, always supporting him, but never overstepping. How she'd made space for his sons while gently trying to carve out room for her own children. In a world that had never truly welcomed them, how she had reshaped herself, publicly and privately, for the sake of an institution that now seemed to be casting her aside. And then came the warning. Camilla allegedly hinted at private documents, letters, emails, handwritten notes, moments from Charles's past that, if revealed, could permanently reshape how the world viewed the monarchy. There were no overt threats, but there didn't need to be. The implication was clear. There are things she's protected, things she could unearth, and she's not alone. Within 24 hours, reports began surfacing that Camilla had quietly initiated contact with several trusted media figures across Europe. Not to schedule interviews, not yet, but to start conversations. Soft, off-the-record chats, planting seeds, whispering just enough to create ripples, the kind of ripples that could easily swell into waves if ignored. The monarchy felt it almost immediately. Headlines began circling, questioning the speed and secrecy behind the decree. Columnists speculated about a widening internal divide between the king and queen. More intriguingly, some outlets began revisiting older stories, half-forgotten anecdotes from Charles's earlier years that now carried new weight in light of recent events. And while Buckingham Palace released no official statement, royal watchers noticed something peculiar. King Charles canceled 2 public appearances that week. No explanation, no substitution, just blank spaces on the calendar. Camilla, too, vanished from sight. For 10 days, the royal rota went quiet, and inside the palace, the tension was palpable. One senior courtier put it bluntly. This wasn't just a family disagreement. This was a rupture. What began as a quiet act of control, a private decision signed in silence, now threatened to spiral into something far more unpredictable. And Camilla, long seen as the steady supporter, the loyal companion, the woman who stayed in the background, had just sent a very clear message. She would not go quietly. Strangely, amid the fallout, another name kept surfacing: Princess Charlotte. At just 10 years old, Charlotte has no formal power, no speeches, no royal duties. And yet, insiders say she's quietly become one of the most strategically positioned heirs in modern royal history. The change in succession wasn't just about removing Camilla's family. It was also about tightening the line, making sure it runs cleanly through one future: William, then George, and then, unmistakably, Charlotte. According to palace aides, Charles has long viewed Charlotte as a stabilizing symbol, poised, observant, and naturally comfortable in public settings. Her early appearances have already drawn comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II herself. Not in personality, but in presence, and that presence is being noticed. In recent months, Charlotte's public appearances have increased subtly but deliberately. From her calm demeanor at the king's coronation to her confident wave during Trooping the Colour, every move is carefully watched and increasingly praised. British media outlets, once focused almost entirely on George, are now running full-page spreads about Charlotte's fashion, her posture, and her future. It's not accidental. Insiders claim senior courtiers have begun informal briefings on the Charlotte Protocol, a long-term plan to elevate her public image, boost her visibility, and gradually shape public perception of her as not just a royal child, but as a future queen's sister. Or, depending how events unfold, something even more. Because the truth is, the line of succession isn't as unshakable as it looks. Yes, George is first in line, but royal history is full of twists, abdications, health crises, sudden shifts in public favor. And Charlotte's positioning makes her a critical safeguard, a second pillar, just in case the first one ever wobbles. Charles's decision to streamline the succession line may have removed distractions like Tom Parker Bowles, but it also sent a loud signal inside palace walls. The crown is not just protecting its present, it's fortifying its future. And Charlotte is now at the center of that. Even Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is said to be quietly guiding the effort, Though still recovering from health challenges of her own, she's reportedly made it clear in private that Charlotte's role is sacred, that her daughter's future must be protected from the same chaos, scrutiny, and intrusion that once plagued Diana and nearly broke William. That's not just maternal instinct, it's a strategy, because for all the royal drama, Camilla's fury, Charles's gamble, the silence from William, there's something else happening underneath. The next generation is being reshaped, quietly, deliberately. And if you listen closely, you can hear it in the way Charlotte's name is suddenly spoken, not just with affection, but with reverence. The monarchy may be weathering a storm, but it knows exactly where its future rests. In the days following the succession shift, the headlines weren't kind to Queen Camilla. What started as whispers quickly turned into front-page speculation. Snubbed, sidelined, shut out. Those were the words splashed across the tabloids. And while Buckingham Palace refused to comment, the silence only made it worse. To the public, it looked like Camilla had lost, not just in the line of succession, but in power, presence, and position. And she felt it. Sources close to the Queen say she was visibly rattled by the decision. Not because she expected her children to rule, that was never the plan, but because she believed they had been quietly woven into the fabric of the monarchy. She'd spent years rehabilitating her image, carving out space for her family in an institution that once wanted nothing to do with her. For it all to be undone in a single move? That hurt. But public sympathy? Not so much. For many Britons, Camilla's public rehabilitation was always tentative. Yes, she was crowned queen. Yes, she stood beside Charles at every major event. But for a large segment of the public, especially Diana loyalists, she remained the other woman. A tolerated figure, not a beloved one. And now that the succession had been clarified, many saw it as a long overdue correction. The contrast between Camilla and Catherine couldn't be sharper. Where Kate is seen as elegant, discreet, and modern, Camilla is still viewed, fairly or not, as a holdover from the past. The public isn't cruel, but it is decisive. Polls taken just weeks after the succession announcement showed a dip in Camilla's favorability, while support for Prince William, Kate, and even Charlotte ticked upwards. Even her usually loyal press allies began to shift tone. Royal commentators, once careful to paint her as a unifying figure, began quietly questioning her role. One former court correspondent noted, "Camilla was always a queen by Charles's design, but the public never fully signed off. And now, with her family removed from the inner circle, her influence is clearly fading. She's been notably absent from several recent high-profile events, and when she does appear, the body language tells the story. Fewer smiles, stiff posture, minimal engagement. She's there, yes, but she's no longer central. The message is subtle but clear. Her reign, at least in influence, may already be winding down." Privately, Camilla is said to be frustrated, even betrayed. After all, she stood by Charles during his lowest points. Scandal, divorce, public outrage. She waited decades for her place in the palace. But as the institution evolves once again, it seems even Queen Camilla can't hold back the tide. And in a monarchy defined by image, that matters more than ever. What King Charles just did wasn't a one-off decision. It was part of something bigger, a calculated long-term reset of the royal house. From the moment he became king, Charles made it clear his reign would be leaner, more modern, and more focused. That meant fewer working royals, tighter budgets, and a sharper public image. Quietly, he began trimming the family tree, not with scissors, but with strategy. Prince Andrew was pushed aside. Harry and Meghan stepped back and were kept at a distance. Now Camilla's children? Off the table. The message is consistent. The future of the monarchy will be streamlined, blood-bound, and tightly controlled. In many ways, this is the monarchy Charles always envisioned. During his decades as Prince of Wales, he often spoke about the burdens of a bloated royal structure. Too many titles, too many duties, too much cost to taxpayers. He believed a smaller core group could maintain public trust without becoming a tabloid circus. And now, as king, he's putting that theory into action. Every move he makes, including this latest one, fits that blueprint. But this particular cut runs deeper than most. Removing Camilla's family isn't just administrative, it's personal. These were people she had brought into the fold. Her children, her grandchildren, people who, while not royal by blood, had become familiar faces at weddings, coronations, and family holidays. Cutting them loose signals something more profound, a shift away from emotional politics and back toward constitutional clarity. This wasn't about punishing Camilla, it was about purifying the line. For centuries, the British royal succession has been based on lineage, titles, inheritance, and duty passed down through blood. Not marriage, not proximity. By reinforcing that, Charles isn't breaking with tradition, he's restoring it. But the timing, the tone, that's where things get complicated. Because in trying to modernize the institution, he's also reigniting old wounds. Some insiders believe this could backfire. The public may admire a slimmed-down monarchy, but they're also watching closely for signs of coldness or cruelty. And Camilla, for all the controversy surrounding her, has become a familiar part of the royal ecosystem. Cutting her family adrift, especially so quietly, may come off as callous, especially if the palace doesn't offer any kind of explanation or gesture of goodwill. Still, the king appears unmoved. This is his moment, possibly his only real chance to reshape the monarchy in his image, and he's not wasting it. Every headline, every decision, every silent shuffle behind palace doors points to one thing: a royal house being restructured, person by person, piece by piece. Camilla may still wear the crown, but make no mistake, this is Charles's monarchy now. For a woman who's spent decades being watched, whispered about, and written off, Camilla knows when silence says more than a speech. Since news broke about her family's quiet removal from the royal succession, Camilla has said nothing. No comment, no statement, not even a leaked quote from a friend of the Queen. For someone once branded the most controversial woman in Britain, her restraint is notable. Some see it as loyalty, others see it as damage control. But either way, her silence is telling, because behind closed doors, insiders say Camilla is stunned. According to palace sources, the Queen consort had no idea this move was coming. It wasn't discussed, it wasn't debated, and when it happened, there was no room to negotiate. For all her influence, for all her presence beside Charles at every major event, this decision wasn't hers to shape. That's left many asking, how much power does Camilla really have? The answer, it seems, is not as much as we thought. For years, Camilla's quiet rise was seen as proof of her sway, her ability to shift public opinion, win over the late Queen, and cement her place at Charles's side. But this latest move draws a line. She may be queen, but she isn't co-ruling. Her role is ceremonial, supportive, and when it comes to reshaping the monarchy's future, she's been firmly sidelined, and yet she's not fighting it. There's no pushback, no whispers of disagreement, no tension on display during public appearances. If anything, Camilla has doubled down on grace under pressure, smiling, showing up, playing her part. It's a classic royal tactic, dignity through distance. But it also fuels another theory, that Camilla understands the cost of staying in the inner circle. If keeping the crown means sacrificing her family's future, she's apparently willing to pay that price. It's not the first time. When she married Charles, she stepped into a storm. When she was crowned, she stepped into history. Now, she steps aside, not from her duties, but from decisions that touch her own bloodline. It's a painful irony. The woman who once fought so hard to be accepted by the royal family now watches her own children be quietly cut away from it. And through it all, she says nothing. But make no mistake, Camilla's silence isn't a weakness, it's a strategy. She knows that survival in the royal family doesn't come from protest. It comes from staying in place, doing the job, and waiting out the storm. That's what she's doing now. And that, perhaps more than anything else, proves just how royal she's become. The royal succession has officially changed, and Camilla's family is no longer part of the future. King Charles didn't just make a symbolic move. He made a statement about blood, power, and who truly belongs inside the House of Windsor. Camilla may still stand beside him, but her children and grandchildren have been quietly written out of the script. No announcement, no explanation, just silence and a new order. This wasn't just a family decision. It was a constitutional one. And in doing so, Charles reminded the world the crown isn't sentimental, it's strategic. And now it is his alone.